After the performance trap, after realizing you're the only one doing the work, there's one last place your mind's going to go to avoid the truth, and that is, but what if I'm the problem? It sounds responsible. It sounds mature. It sounds like something a self-aware person would ask, right? And it has kept more people trapped in dead relationships than denial ever has. You see, if you're the problem, then you can fix it. If you're the problem, you don't have to grieve. If you're the problem, you don't have to admit that love, effort, and patience aren't enough when only one person is willing to grow. Today, we're tearing that question apart, not to protect your ego, but to stop you from disappearing in the name of self-work. This is the Architect of Self podcast, and I'm Carl Gregory, advanced certified clinical trauma therapist, neuropsychotherapist, former high-risk operator, and the guy who sat across from enough men and women in crisis to see the same pattern on repeat. Before we go any further, if you're already on the edge, if you're white-knuckling it, or if you've thought about not being here at all, and I'm not talking about quitting your job, this podcast isn't going to be enough for you. Hit the pause button, call your therapist, text a friend, or reach out to the nationwide crisis line at 988. You're not weak for needing help. You're just being human. Welcome to the only podcast that refuses to coddle your excuses and overvalidate your feelings. You don't need another love yourself episode. You don't need another communicate better post. You need someone to call out the bullshit that's quietly strangling you and the people around you. Today's topic, but what if I'm the problem? Self-blame, guilt bonds, and the last lie you tell yourself before you disappear. There's a moment that arrives after clarity, and it's rarely dramatic. It doesn't kick the door in, it doesn't shout. It just slips into the room when everything goes quiet and says something that sounds thoughtful, reasonable, and responsible. But what if I'm the problem? It's not going to happen during the argument. Not when you're spiraling, not when you're crying in the car or the bathroom, or lying awake at night. It shows up after you finally see the pattern, after the denial cracks, after the last two episodes land and something in you goes, oh shit, this is real. And that question feels noble. It feels self-aware. It feels like growth, and it feels like maturity, which is exactly why it is so dangerous. That question doesn't come from wisdom. It comes from fear. Fear that if you're not the problem, then you can't fix this. Fear that if you're not the issue, then effort won't save the relationship. Fear that you might have to accept something final instead of something fixable. And for a nervous system trained to survive by staying attached, that feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. So today, we're not validating that question. We're putting it on trial. The past Stoics had a brutal clarity about this kind of thing. They weren't interested in comforting stories. They were interested in what was true, what was within your control, and what was costing you your character. They didn't say, try harder to make people treat you better. They said, if you want peace, stop handing your self-respect to things you don't control. That's where this episode lives. Because what if I'm the problem is often just a modern, trauma-informed way of saying, I'd rather blame myself than face the limits of someone I love. Let's say that again. I'd rather blame myself than face the limits of someone I love. And I get it. Self-blame can at times feel powerful. If I'm the problem, then hell, I can fix it. If I'm the problem, then this isn't the end. If I'm the problem, then I don't have to grieve. I don't have to risk loneliness. I don't have to face the quiet terror of realizing I may be standing in the front of a locked door. Self-blame gives you the illusion of control. It hands you a wrench and says, here, keep working. That's not insight. That's a coping strategy, and a very effective one sometimes. So effective, in fact, it can keep you trapped for years. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people dance around. This relationship functions because you over-function. It doesn't survive despite your self-doubt. It survives because of it. You track the emotional climate like a meteorologist. You initiate every repair conversation. You soften your language, regulate your tone, and pre-apologize just to keep the peace. You explain your feelings like you're defending a dissertation to someone who didn't read the abstract. And every time you turn the problem inward, every time you ask, maybe it's me, the system stabilizes. No one else has to move. Your self-questioning becomes a structural beam holding the whole thing up. So let's ask a question the Stoics would respect. Who benefits if I believe I'm the problem? That's a tough answer, because it's rarely you. Now, we need to separate two things that get lumped together and weaponized against you: accountability and self-erasure. Accountability is clean, it's honest, it asks, where do I escalate? Where do I shut down? Where do I repeat patterns that don't serve me? Accountability leads to behavioral change. It sharpens your character. Self-blame? That's different. Self-blame asks, how small do I need to become to keep this? It asks, how do I stop being inconvenient? It asks, how much more of myself can I amputate without bleeding out? I don't wake up every morning and ask how to disappear more gracefully. I ask how to live in accordance with my values, even when it costs me comfort. My life is never about tolerating misery quietly when it appears. It's about refusing to outsource my integrity when it is present. See, your nervous system, it already knows the difference between accountability and self-erasure. That's why it shows up in your body before it shows up in your thoughts. Here's a test. It's simple, it's brutal, no philosophy degree required. Just ask yourself, do I feel calmer when I stay silent or when I tell the truth? If silence feels like relief and honesty feels like danger, that's not maturity. That's a threat response. That's your body saying, I survive better when I don't speak. Stoics would call that a loss of agency. Modern psychology calls it fawning. Either way, it's not growth. Most people justify this with compassion. And compassion is where this really gets sneaky. You tell yourself they had a hard childhood. You tell yourself they don't mean to shut down. You tell yourself they're wounded, not malicious. All of which might be true, but then something subtle happens. Compassion turns into caretaking, and caretaking turns into management. You start carrying empathy for two people, regulation for two people, responsibility for two people. You become the emotional adult in the room while calling it love. And somewhere along the way, intimacy quietly suffocates under all that effort. Here's the line most people refuse to cross. If compassion only flows in one direction, it's not intimacy. It's labor. And labor without reciprocity breeds resentment, not connection. This is why this trap doesn't catch reckless people. It catches the thoughtful ones, the self-aware ones, the ones who read, reflect, journal, and apologize. Your insight becomes the system's safety net. The more you understand, the less anyone else has to. Until one day, you're sitting there thinking, how did I become the only adult in this relationship? Reflection without reciprocity isn't wisdom. It's a setup. So stop asking the question that keeps you trapped. Stop asking, what if I'm the problem? Instead, ask the question that actually exposes reality. When I express pain clearly and calmly, what happens next? Not once, not during a blow-up, but over time. Do they get curious or defensive? Do they lean in or make you regret speaking? People capable of growth don't punish honesty. They work with it. Here's another gut check. If you are constantly questioning yourself and they are never questioning themselves, that unevenness tells you everything you need to know. Responsibility in a relationship is not meant to be a solo sport. And no amount of inner work on your part will force someone else to develop a spine. Let's also drop the fantasy that this is neutral. Staying in self-blame has a cost, and you're already paying it. It shows up as anxiety, a short fuse, emotional numbness you call being calm, a quiet grief that follows you around like a background noise. You don't remain unchanged in these dynamics. You erode slowly enough to call it being reasonable. Our ancestors, they warned us about this. They believed that the greatest danger wasn't pain. It was living out of alignment with your nature, becoming someone you don't respect just to avoid discomfort. That was the real failure. So let me be precise. You may have patterns to clean up. You may have trauma to untangle. You may need to communicate more clearly and regulate more intentionally. But wanting effort, presence, and reciprocity does not make you broken. And if your growth only ever results in you becoming easier to ignore, to tolerate, or dismiss, that's not growth. That's compliance dressed up as enlightenment. Next episode, we pull the last support beam out from underneath the system. We're talking about what actually is going to happen when you stop chasing. Not as manipulation, not as strategy, but as an experiment in truth. What people do when the emotional labor disappears. Why some relationships recalibrate and yet others collapse. And why clarity often arrives the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand. If this episode stung, good. The sting is where denial burns off. Remember, don't waste time arguing about what a good relationship should be. Look at what you're living and decide whether it's worthy of you. Remember to stay sharp, stay honest, and stop calling self-erasure accountability. If you want to go farther, find one of my guided journals, Confrontations to pull your soul back from the depths you have been hiding in way too long. And if you don't see a journal that you think will help you, take your mask off, then look again. It's there. My journals take 3 minutes out of your day, and that's it. But the hit you will get from them when you least expect it. When you think it hasn't done anything to help, it'll blow your mind. You're going to use it to track where you perform, where you disappear, where you lie to yourself, and where your self-worth is looking for approval. As always, if you want any of this material to read, head over to Substack, where it's all spelled out in letters and words. If you want to learn more about me, my journals, books, my theories, head over to carlhgregory.com. Remember, it's a you problem. And today's the day you finally start to fix it. Drop a comment below or DM me on Insta about what hit hardest. Share this episode with someone who you think could get something from it, like your sister, your brother, friend, or partner. And be sure to like and subscribe to get alerted for the next podcast drop so you don't miss it. Stay in the fight. Stay frosty, my friends.